All right, and we have one more issue that was brought up right at the beginning with this, our new nation, our Constitution, and what we were going to do. So this one's not part of the Constitution, but it was where we are going to house our government. So issue number 4. Where should the new nation's government be located? You can also just call this on your issues the nation's capital. And that'll be a little bit less to type in. So where are we going to put the capital? What are we going to do? All right. So remember, we have to get our 2 sides, and then we'll decide how we compromise. So upon the ratification means that we took the Constitution, agreed to follow it, everyone signed it and said this is what we're going to do. So following the ratification and adoption of the Constitution in 1789, the young government of the United States did not have a permanent home because of the divide that was developing between the North and South. So we can see the Civil War is on its way even now. No one could agree on the permanent location of the federal seat of government. It was even proposed that the capital should change locations every 10 years as yet another check against the creation of a powerful national government. Can you imagine if we changed all the time and had our capital moving all over the different places? And actually, this is misspelled right there. Okay, so the Compromise of 1790, the Compromise of 1790 created between Alexander Hamilton, Thomas Jefferson, and James Madison set the eventual location of the capital to be on a brand new location, the District of Columbia. Here's our first side. Alexander Hamilton wanted the capital to be in his home state of New York. So side 1, the first argument was New York City. Somewhere there. Okay? Jefferson and Madison, however, wanted it to be on the Potomac River in the south. Both sides greatly feared that the location of the capital would affect national policy. A northern location would produce a government that favored northern ideals and will force an end to the southern way of life, whereas a southern location would promote slavery. Okay, so at the same time as this debate, Alexander Hamilton was consumed with the idea of trying to get Congress to pass his financial plan to set the country on a bright financial future. A large part of this plan was that the national government would assume all state debts incurred in the Revolutionary War and therefore create one national debt. Southern states, having already paid off their war debts, despised this policy. Why should we help repay the debt of the northern states? Many southern states asked. So now you can see where we're getting our second side. So side number 2 said we need to have it in the south somewhere. They didn't give us a specific, but they said make sure it's down south. So now we're going to end up with our compromise. All right, and it says, and so a compromise was born between Alexander Hamilton and Thomas Jefferson and James Madison. So Hamilton gave Jefferson and Madison their capital in the south. It would be placed along the Potomac River and would be given the name of the District of Columbia. To prevent any northern or southern bias, the capital would not be located in a state. Instead, the capital was created from donated land given by Maryland and Virginia and would lay between them. A temporary capital was created in Philadelphia while Washington, D.C. was being constructed, and John Adams was the first president to live there when he moved into the White House just days before his presidency ended. So you should know that George Washington never actually lived in Washington, D.C. So our compromise, to make it very simple, is that we decided to have it in Washington, D.C. So that gets you your first little bit of an answer. But let's go back and make sure we know what everyone was thinking. So with the first proposal, New York, it wasn't just about New York. Here's some other things. All right, so we wanted the U.S. to assume all war debts. So U.S. government to take on war debt, meaning that it would be the federal government that was owing it, not everywhere else. And then this one was supported by Hamilton. It was his big idea. And then for our side number 2, there was a little bit of difference. They said, let's do it in the South, right? And it says that why should the South pay for North's loans because the South had already paid for their loans. But if you consider North versus South, most of the fighting was in the North anyway, so it's not particularly fair either direction. They also did not want the North to have too much power. North should not get too much power because that's always a concern. North and South are already starting to hate each other even now. And then one of our big supporters on this was James Madison. So he will also become a president. And he said, let's have our capital somewhere south. Let's get it where we want it. So here's our compromise. Our capital is in Washington, D.C. Here's a little bit more of it. So the U.S. did take on the war debt. So Hamilton got that like he wanted. And then the capital, however, is still considered in the South. So it was in Washington, D.C. So make sure you put the compromises in Washington, D.C. That's in the South. And one other part with that is that it was still on the Potomac, and it still made sure that the North did not get too much power. But in addition to that, it was not a part of any state, because we didn't want any particular state to house the nation's capital and have more power than the other states.